Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, we are going to be doing this podcast episode of the Fab Fatties that has to do with the categories. I thought that this would be fun to do. I know a lot of you guys love the Fab Fatties reaction, so consider this my Christmas present to you guys. I wanted to make sure I did something basically. And I know a lot of you guys love these. The other thing too is I felt like it would be a good capstone moment because they're going to talk about all these different aspects of size and different things, and I felt like we could go over eras that have been on this channel as I'm reaching the conclusion of my downsizing journey. You know, it is slowly happening. It's like I feel like I'm slowly landing, you know. We're getting to the end, and obviously it makes me reflective. Plus it's the end of the year, so that also makes me reflective. So I just felt like it would be a good thing to react to for all those reasons. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I do have a playlist on the channel that has to do with downsizing advice throughout the eras. And I have all my activistic videos on there if you'd like to check that out. It has a lot to do with the aspects of downsizing that are not just calories in, calories out, that I feel like are not talked about that much. And so, yeah, they're all there. And I do have more coming, by the way. But anyways, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's get into the downsizing eras. Let's have a capstone moment and let's start this reaction.
Hey everyone, welcome back. You are with the Fab Fatties. My name is Alyssa,
Rebecca,
Allie, and today we are talking about skinny people, mid-sized people, fat people, really fat people, and super fat people. And you know, these terms have been used in our community.
I've experienced all of them except snatched. So I call them average, mid, small fat, and then I'd consider it tortured or morbid, like when you're getting bigger. And then smo. That's what I call them on the channel, which is super morbidly obese. So that's what I call them.
Some longer than others, and our levels of, I don't know, comfort with them also vary. So today we're going to kind of dive into that conversation and see where it leads us. But Rebecca's going to start us off with some definitions.
I am a teacher. Let's go.
Gosh.
All right, so I think whenever I first started blogging, it was pretty obvious right away that there were different kinds of plus size experiences. Yeah. And as someone who has been, I lived, I would say,
I was not in the place that.
Hold on.
I started blogging around 22, and up until a couple of years ago, I was size 26 plus. And I knew immediately that because I was size 26, I was not the norm in the plus size space.
Sure.
So there's lots and lots of retailers that sell plus size. They stop at size 20, 22, 24, right? And then you get less and less choices as you get into 26, 28, 30. And then there's barely any choices if you're 32, 34, 36 to 40. And so I knew it from a fashion perspective that plus size was not one size fits all, even for plus size, right? And
yeah, so I think what we need to talk about is they're going to be talking a lot about fashion. I'm going to do my best to fill in some of those gaps as far as like social roles, things that I've observed, how my experience was, how I've witnessed other people's experiences, and all that stuff. Also, all of the stereotypes and tropes that we've seen throughout time immemorial. Basically. So we're going to talk about all of it. Where I agree with them is that there are different experiences. what I want to say is to those of you guys who have never been fat, you may not really witness it. Even for some of you guys who have downsized, you may not have noticed it as much, or you may not have been as aware, because sometimes you just don't notice how other people are seeing you sometimes as you're downsizing. And then other times you're hyper aware of it. So it depends, but I think what people need to understand is that if you have been very fat, you have this kind of perspective where you can see that people are treated differently, especially because you are kind of hyper obsessed with it, or you're just very, very aware, I guess you could say, because it is your lived experience. It's something that you're seeing every single day and all that stuff. Now, for me, I went through these different phases pretty quickly. I averaged a phase around 6 months, except for the SMO phase. That took a long time. The super morbid phase, it lasted, honestly, like a year and a half. Like, it was a long one. It's a long stretch. Which that phase, to me, it's just a lot of everything. Basically, it's very difficult. It's the hardest it will ever be. So if you're in that category, it's very hard to lose during that phase, pretty much no matter what you do. I consider it like a pit. You can get out, though. I showed you could. I did the best I could to show how I tried my best. You have to count the seasons and all this stuff. It's a lot. There's a lot of physicality within super morbid obesity. I tried to bring attention to that, and I did get shit for it. I will say a trend that you'll find when I talk about this is I got shit for everything I said, everything I've ever said about this. But to me, that's activism. That's the work. So I'm not being a total bitch, but I also am. You know what I mean? Because I have to talk about it, but I don't actually give a fuck. I never changed because I got pushed back on pretty much every era, every single time. But yeah, that one's very physical, basically. You need to track the seasons. You might have to only lose in the spring and summer. You have to have an on and off season. I call it the SMO ERAS tour because it requires that much planning. It requires strategy, on season, off season. It requires almost a level of rehearsal, repetition, all of it. It's very difficult. So if you think of how Taylor Swift did the Eras tour and how rehearsed that was, how often she had to do it. She had to do it even if she didn't feel good or if she felt great. It didn't matter. She had a breakup. She still had to keep going. It's all that stuff. It's the same thing with SMO. You have to. It is your top priority. And it has to be your top priority because it's dangerous to be that big. So your priorities need to be straight if you are in a SMO era. It's very important, but it is difficult. There's a lot of hormonal shifts and changes. It's highly, highly physical. I would say it is probably the most physical phase of the journey. You will have to get in touch with your body. You will have to understand what your body is trying to communicate with you, and you have to at times almost negotiate with the hormones and fat that is on your body. It is pretty crazy if you have not experienced it. The emotional pitch of the SMO era is essentially drowning and waiting for the water to come down. It's it's right here and you're barely breathing, and you have to wait for it to come down. It's also a feeling of turning a huge ship around. You can't dart. You can't be like this. That's more like small fat and lower. You have to be like this. Turn the ship. So it takes a lot of patience. It's very it's very difficult. That's why I always advocate to never go there. Don't go there if you can avoid it. There's a reason why a lot of people never get out of it, because it's very hard. There can be physical issues, psychological issues. There usually are. There's usually severe issues at that stage. It is super morbid obesity for a reason. It's challenging to get out. You can, though, but you have to be strategic. Everything is strategy. I would suggest, honestly, you approach it like a metronome. So you take the steps that you have to take, you do your rehearsal, then you do the tour every single day. Okay, and you hit it like a clockwork. Boom, 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 no matter how you feel. Boom, boom, boom. It's April through November. I'm losing weight. Okay, I'm taking a breather now until next April, now that it's November, you see? And you have to just do it, and you hold on to that progress. Then you start again, and you just start and you do it, and it takes a while. There's often regain in that phase too. It cannot be helped. Your appetite is too high, and people don't understand that, but it's true. It's very often that your appetite is very, very, very high. It's very difficult. So everything in regard to what you are eating should be to keep your hunger in check. Everything. You typically have more calories at that phase, so use them. Don't try to go super fast. That's not something I would suggest, especially if you're doing it naturally, because you'll likely fail. You need to be sustainable, slow, and steady. Try to do that. I would say 2 to 3 pounds per week. When you're really big, if you're let's say you're over 350, you can do 3 pounds a week. But eat at 2 pounds per week loss, and then do activity to get that extra pound. Which a lot of people be like, oh my gosh, but it's like, no, it's different. Everything when you're super big, it burns a lot of calories because you're really big. So I would suggest to do that, but it's tough. It's very tough. Definitely look at some of the videos I did on the channel in 2023. I talked about what I was doing a lot throughout that time. I would highly suggest that. It is very, very, very physical, super physical. And everything is about managing that hunger because it's ferocious at that stage. And people don't understand it, and it is physical. It's not just toxic ritualistic. It is also physical, so just keep that in mind. So that is my brief rundown on the super morbidly obese era. There may be times you have to slow down because it might be too much psychologically. It's really hard. But you have to develop a self-awareness. You have to develop a relationship with your body. You need to understand what your body is telling you. And it's your responsibility to decode those messages. If you need other interventions, it's up to you to figure out what works for you. It's very hard. So I did it through tracking the seasons. I did it through counting and being very active. That's how I did it, which essentially I had a job that was physical, and I went to the gym, and I would go once every 5 days, and I'd lift weights. So you have to take things slower at the gym. Typically, you have to let yourself recover. You're very delicate at that phase. It's tough. So the emotional pitch of it, like with how you talk to yourself, be gentle, but be consistent. Always consistent. You don't make a decision based on how you feel. You make a decision based on the day, the time of the year, all of it. Something that has nothing to do with how you feel, because how you feel is all over the place. Your hormones are crazy at that stage, okay? So be consistent. Manage your hunger. Be as active as you can for as long as you can. If you can't, then stop. Don't injure yourself ever. And be gentle, and understand that a lot of people have no experience with supermorbid obesity, so they don't know what they're talking about. So you're a little bit on your own. You're on your own, kid, a little bit. It's tough. So that stage is very, very tough as nails. But if you can do that, you can do all of it, in my opinion. You can. So, yeah.
As I was in the space more, I started hearing some terms to help explain this. So this is where we get into some spectrum terms. And some of this language comes from fashion. And some of this language comes from the fat community, who has developed it over time as a way to talk about real things that were happening. And I do think, again, like, I love words, and words are created to describe things. So
To communicate.
to
Yeah.
communicate, like to
Yeah.
Yeah,
describe.
I love them too. That's why I did subvert some of the terms and made my own, basically, because I think that they're necessary to convey different stages or aspects of a journey. And I think that it's important to find a way to categorize, especially on social media. I got a lot of shit for it. I'm going to keep saying it in this video. I got a lot of shit for using categories, but I use them in order to communicate both to people that are embarking on a downsizing journey and people that needed to understand it better. So I did my best to use my own categories to describe what tends to happen. Now, what I will tell you guys as a disclaimer is that there are blended aspects. So there is gray area. I had to make them hard eras from a social media perspective, but you tend to have a little bit of overlap between eras within time and space, basically. Like, it tends to happen because, for example, when I was tortured, which if you guys have been on the channel, you'll remember when I was morbidly obese, it was my tortured era. I called it Tortured Mo. As I got towards August of 2024, I went to a wedding and I was feeling a little bit bratty at the same time. So there was a little bit, I had my albatross moment, which was kind of like people were getting shocked at how much I was downsizing. And I even had a little bit of scandal at the time because people were starting to judge me very, very differently. And I was acting somewhat inappropriately, but it's because people have lesser standards for you when you're very, very big. And I wasn't anymore. So there was a little bit of a disconnect socially at the time. But it was really in that albatross phase that some bratty aspects were coming in, basically. Like, I was having fun at the wedding. I had a little bit of a drink at the wedding. You know, like, I didn't have to be as strict as I used to be. And I was having a little bit more fun. I was feeling a little bit lighter. But it was still definitely my tortured era. But there were just some aspects of overlap. And it was the same thing when I was getting from small fat to mid. I started to get a little sour towards the end of the bra era. I started to have a little bit of overlap, just as now I'm starting to have some overlap between the vanity weight era and the next one, which what you're seeing is a lot of confidence and smugness coming in. That's kind of coded as the next era. So there's a little bit of overlap. However, I would still consider this a vanity weight era, as I'm still really, really, really tired, which is typically how you feel in that stage. But anyways, I just want you guys to know, like, they're not necessarily hard lines. It's more like a dimmer than a light switch, because weight is a spectrum. And that can irritate people, but it doesn't matter. It's true.
I have ideas to be able to share and, like, build on them. So I think these words are interesting. So one word you might hear people talk about is straight size. Straight size is pretty simply someone who is not fat. By the way, all of this information I got from this blog post called Fattagories, which I think is
I love
Hilarious.
that.
So I would call it thin. I think thin and or average. But what people that are fat don't understand is that within thinness, there is a spectrum within thinness as well. Which people who have been thin their whole lives, you guys know that. It's like there's thin people who look good, thin people who look bad, people who are kind of thick, people who are really skinny, people who are muscular, people who are, you know, all of it. So basically, fat people view that as all one category, which to them, they're saying straight size. I use the term thin or average, basically. I consider myself, basically, it's thin, but average within thin, basically. So average is in the thin umbrella, but I would identify as thin at this point.
I love that.
and the website is fluffykittenparty.com, which is really random, but
I
it's
also
it's,
love
it's,
that.
it's a someone in the community's blog, and she's had a lot of people respond and, like, has edited and kept kind of up to date and, like, taken in feedback for it. So I thought it was a really well written community post, basically, that she did. So a straight size person is someone that is not fat, someone who is not fat. Oh my gosh, my grammar got me. They don't require plus size clothing, and their body size isn't a barrier for them in their daily life.
They can walk into a store
Yeah.
pick off something off the rack, and something in that store is going to fit them.
Right. And note that none of this has to do with but positive body image. You know, people can feel however they want about their body. Is that literally their body fits into all the public spaces that they need to go in, and they require clothing that is fairly well accessible at different price points, right? A mid-sized person is a newer term, and that
They get hate from everybody. So I call this mid. Mid is difficult because essentially you get criticism and hate all across the spectrum, basically. I still think small fat is worse, though, to be honest. Mid, however, there can be some aspects of your nervous system kind of coming back to life, so you tend to be more mad often, and people are also, there's mutability in being mid-sized. So it's like you're not fat, but you're not thin. You're neither. And that's hard to deal with because some people will view you as thin, other people will view you as fat, and it's very whiplashy. And so there is a bit of hate there, but you typically don't have as bad of health issues. It's more like social problems or your fatness affects you visually in a way where it does take you down a notch, basically. Whereas average, it doesn't really take you down a notch. It's just not necessarily an asset either. Whereas what I would call snatched or in great shape, then your body is an asset. It actually helps you. It lifts you up. Average, it doesn't do anything. Mid, visually, the fatness brings you down. It makes you look worse. So I do consider mid to be where the fatness is especially visible, like visual. Once you start to have physical barriers due to your fatness, even if it's like you can't go up a flight of stairs, that's when you start to get to fat. Then you're small fat. Then you're going to start having physical barriers. You can't keep up with people as much, right? You start to sweat all the time, or you have this, you have that. Like, to me, that's, you're getting into fat, where it's not just visual. Mid is just visual, which it will depend on your time and place. These categories are all subjective. However, it doesn't mean that they're any less relevant. Culture is subjective to a certain extent, and so we still have to navigate it.
That is someone, it's a term that I think this is interesting. This blog post says this is a term for straight-sized people.
Huh.
I think it's interesting. But they coin it to describe they're not skinny, but also not fat. They are mid-size, and they're often around a women's size 12 or 14 in the U.S., and in some cases smaller. And I have seen people probably size 10 start using this term, but I would say between 10 and 14.
It's very subjective. It really depends on your height. You can't really base it purely on size or weight or anything. It's very, very, very individual, but you notice that other people know it. It's something that people like intuitively understand. I had an interesting experience just because I do have a lot of, well, first of all, fat acceptance has seemingly migrated to England or, to the UK. And I have a lot of you guys watch from the UK. And so there was some confusion there when I identified as mid because it didn't quite line up by the UK standard, even though it's close to American standard. It's typically about a size down. So by British standards, I just became average, probably in November. But by American standards, I became average in July. So it's interesting how it kind of works that way. But that's because I think that they were more confused because we're more similar. But they're still technically a size down. That shows the subjectivity. So remember, keep your time and place in mind when it comes to this stuff. Where you're going to get more objective is when you're in obesity, class 1, class 2, class 3, right? That's going to be more scientific, medicalized, all that kind of stuff, which it's very relevant to those categories because they do describe health outcomes and, statistical likelihood and of those health outcomes within those groups. And they are real. Like, you do feel a difference as you shift from one to the other physically. When we're getting to like just the visual categories, which is like average, snatched, mid, it can be very time and place relevant. But I remember when I announced that I was mid in February, it was around May that I could see I went down one more size, and then I was like, okay, I think if I was in the UK now, I would be considered mid. No. So it's interesting how that works. But it's the same for any country. It's just, I like to use that example because it is similar. It's like it rhymes, you know? Whereas I think Canada, I don't know how they are. They're probably more similar to America. And then because Canada is pretty similar. Like, I know they hate it when you say that, but I mean, we're really close geographically and stuff. So it's not that different. And I'm sorry, Canadians that hate America, but I think it's hard for countries that are farther away, even English speaking countries. It's hard for them to tell, like, the accent and stuff like that. It's hard for them to tell the difference. So I think it's pretty similar. It's probably the most similar. But yeah. It's just interesting. Now, when you get to like other cultures, it can be totally different. Like if we're looking at like South Korea, we're all fat, basically. Everybody is. So it's like, I'm just kidding but not, you know what I'm saying? Like, it just depends. So always keep that in mind when we're talking about this, and keep in mind that they're only going to look at it from an American perspective, which is really, really important. Especially because fat activism, it was born here. So it's going to have a more American leaning or an American bias compared to other cultures and countries and all that. So keep that in mind. And yeah, I just want to let you know.
They're using the term. And they say this is a variant of straight size, but that it's on the spectrum of straight size. They're on the larger end of the spectrum of straight sizes.
Is that because that's the average size?
No, because the average size is actually 18, size 18.
So it's bigger than what they're saying is mid-size.
Right.
Well, no. So they're wrong there. They're talking about like if you combine all of the sizes together in one pile, if you actually look at, I guess it would be the median. I'm sorry if I'm messing up my statistical analysis. I forgot a little bit. I'm a little rusty. But I don't know. I'm sure somebody will tell me. If you look at the one that's most plentiful, what you'll find is probably it's more so that 14 would be the most plentiful. Like when you get to mid-size, there's a lot of people in the US that are mid. A lot. There's a lot of people that are small fat as well. And then I'd say those two categories are very, very plentiful in the United States. Extremely plentiful. Mid-size, I think there's just so many people that are in the US. 18, I don't think that's actually the average. I would still say it's probably 14, just based on like what I've observed. If you look at statistics, obesity statistics, all of it, most people that are obese are class 1, and they're usually not super high up in it. It's still bad, but statistics are often misused by fat activists to paint this picture that most people are super morbidly obese, which is not true. So I think they're thinking about the combined aspect of all, because some people who are super morbidly obese, they're very, very big. So that will pull it up, if that makes any sense. That pulls up the average. But if you look at like people in public in the United States, what you'll find is tons of mid-sized people. There's plenty of average people too. Like, I know we act like everybody in America is so fat. That's not true. But there's a lot of mid-sized people, a lot. I'd probably say that's the most by far. So people who just kind of have a big gut or, that kind of thing. There's a lot. It's very common here. And it's mostly people that are within class 1 obesity or at the very low end of it, or are very overweight but not quite obese. That is your most common American. So just, if you don't believe me, go out in public, look what you see. That's what you're going to find most of the time. You don't see tons and tons of people who are super, super huge. You just don't. That's not as common as they make it out to be. You wouldn't even see people that look like them. And they're not even like super huge. They're pretty big though. They might be small. They're either morbid or super morbid, but they angle their podcasts to make them look bigger, but they're not as common either. So it's kind of like a fat acceptance conundrum or paradox where it's like, there's so many of us, everybody's just like us, but we're always oppressed by everybody at the same time, or we're marginalized constantly. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's because it's not true. So mid-size is basically everyone. Like, that's where it's like, oh, that's really mainstream. And then average is average, pretty much. There's still a lot of people that are just maybe a little pudgy, maybe a little thick, super skinny, right? Like all that stuff. It's like an average body type. It's like you're not super in shape, but you're not fat either. You're not even big enough to be considered mid-size. So it's like, yeah, it's probably still that 14 is what I'm trying to say. They're not looking at it correctly.
That doesn't make sense to me. That should be part of straight size, and mid-size should be the mid.
Well, mid-size is technically part of straight size.
Like mid.
Yeah.
You're not.
But think
not
about
skinny,
how many
not fat.
retailers only go to a size 24. If that's the case, they are the midpoint of those sizes.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Sure.
Yeah. But like basically these folks most likely aren't having to go into the plus size section. They might be getting the extra large, the extra extra large. Mm-hmm. They might be getting the 14, 16. But generally they're finding their clothes at most retailers in the straight size section. Even though we do know that some straight sizes literally have 3 sizes, small, medium, large, right? And so that's where they do have some different experiences than the smaller end of the spectrum of straight sizes.
And
Yeah. They make everything about shopping.
I do think it's an important distinction, and I think it's probably important for us to get through this and then kind of go into our feelings, but I do think it's an important distinction to say that, while they may at times find themselves venturing into plus size, they are not limited by only plus size.
Yeah. So it says, and this is back to your point,
especially if you're shorter. But it's, again, you still take a hit to your appearance being mid. It's hard to style mid-size. It's very, very hard. Like, you have to be very talented to be able to dress well as a mid-sized person. I'm just going to say it. There's a reason why there's so much content that's based around dressing yourself as a mid-size girly or boily. Well, not really boilies, but with mid-sized guys, it's just like put on a t-shirt and hope for the best. You try to put on a jacket, it still looks like crap. I'm just going to be real about it. It's hard. It doesn't look good. It can be really hard. I've seen, like, for example, there was this one mid-sized girl that I saw. She was wearing like a prairie dress, I think. Prairie style dress. Looked horrible. It's just really hard. I believe it was a prairie style dress. Lexi, if you watch this, let me know. You know who I'm talking about. It's very hard to style. When you are mid-size, all of your clothing decisions are being made to mitigate the fact that you are mid-size, because when you're bigger, it's easier to have a certain aesthetic. And then when you're average, it's easier to have a certain aesthetic. When you're in between that, it's really difficult. And a lot of women are really bothered by that. It's difficult. A lot of women care about fashion. They care about style. They care about how they're dressing. I know that it's not exactly like the deepest issue in the world, but it's still difficult. And there is something to say about the psychological impact of things just flat out not looking good because your proportions are weird, or you swell a lot. Like, a lot of people who are mid drink a lot, so they'll have like a lot of fluid fluctuation, and it's visually challenging. I don't know how else to describe it. It is visually challenging in a way that even being average isn't. So it sucks, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think in some cases it can be an asset, but even still, you'd probably be doing better. Like, some people may prefer like a mid-sized girl over a super skinny girl, but typically, even if you were just thick or on the the thicker end average, it still would be better because your proportions would be different. It's just tough. It's tough. It's very, very tough from a fashion perspective. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you have to be really good, honestly. And I was not that good. So I was like, oh. And that's kind of like mid-size to me is like, it's like that typical high school movie from the 90s fat. It's that typical like high school TV show style fat where it's like they're not actually fat, but they have a visual, there's like a hit to the visual aspect of a person. But it's not like they can't play a sport or they can't go out or they're too tired or they have to like sit down at the club or whatever. It's not really like that. It's that kind of thing. I hope I'm making sense. That's what I would consider mid or mid-size. So yeah, I also think it's helpful to identify as mid or mid-size as you are downsizing because it starts to help you to distance yourself from fatness and the label of fatness. It can be a hard thing to do, to no longer identify as fat and to identify as thin. That's hard for a lot of people. So I think, in my opinion, psychologically identifying as mid-size, it is a good way to create distance and to start to venture towards identifying as thin or average. So think about it that way too. A lot of people hate the term. Again, I got so much shit for it, but it worked. Didn't it? It worked. So, yeah. I'm still going to expose all this stuff. I'm still going to do my best to put this info out there to help you guys practically or psychologically who are coming down, who are downsizing. You need to know this stuff. It's very helpful. It would have been very helpful for me to understand what the hell was coming down to me as I was becoming mid. I was like, what the actual fuck is going on? But yeah, just... yeah. I got a lot of shit for it. I didn't care. Kept it moving. It worked.
The bell curve of sizes. We know that's not true if this is based on, because like a lot of sizes go up to like 40 beyond, right? But they're not considered fat by the majority of the population. Majority of population aren't going to look at them and say you're fat.
It's 50-50. That's a lie. Oops.
All right, so what you were talking about.
If you're not truly mid, you can lean thin, you can lean fat, like you can be close. Remember, it is a spectrum. So it shifts. But if somebody was like true mid of mid, what you typically see is you don't look the best, but you're not like, it's hard to categorize you. So people are like, and a lot of people will be like, well, you don't look good. That's what they think. You don't look good. So you must be fat then. And it's like, no, you can look bad and be thin. There's a difference. And people just don't understand that. Well, you look weird. Well, yeah, but you can look weird and be thin. It's different. A lot of people don't understand that. So they'll be like, so it's like people look at you when you're mid and it's like they're calculating in their brain. It's like, okay. And then so you'll walk through life and half people be like, oh my God, you look amazing. Oh my gosh. And the other half are like, oh my gosh. And it's like really weird. It's awful. I hated it personally. But if you're prepared for it, it did help. Like somebody told me, there was somebody who commented and they let me know. And I'm so happy they told me. I really appreciated it. So I'm put it out there. I don't care. I don't care if it pisses everyone off. I'm gonna put it out there.
Called small fat. So a small fat is a U.S. woman's 18 or in the 1X, 2X range. And they're on the smallest end of the fat spectrum. So we've left behind the straight size spectrum. We are now in the fat spectrum. These are people who are likely to be seen as fat by other people, but they're generally not shut out of many areas of their life solely due to their weight. So again, they're probably still going to fit into an airplane seat. They might not even need a seatbelt extender.
I didn't.
going to have some issues finding clothing, but they're going to have more access than others, but they still might face weight bias in a doctor's office. They still might have people express concerns about their size, etc.
They're still going to have some health problems, which what you'll typically find is you start to develop as you get into class 1 obesity. You'll start to have some dopamine issues because you have less dopamine receptors when you are obese in your brain. So you start to have a little bit more issues with focus. You can be a little bit more restless, and that can translate as anxiety, and it can create a desire to eat more at that stage. So once you become obese, it can start becoming difficult to find motivation to downsize. So when you're small fat, I consider that to be it's a very comfortable phase for a lot of people. However, there are still health issues. You still tend to be somewhat moody, like especially if you're an emotional girly pop. You're still going to be moody. You're still going to have issues with breathing, or you're going to be out of breath, or you can't really run. You can't keep up, right? If you have friends who are thin, they're walking fast, and you're struggling a little bit when you're small fat. You can go to the gym more, though. It's easier to work out. You recover a lot faster than at bigger sizes. And it's easier to be active. So I consider it an active phase. Within a downsizing journey, small fat is very, very, very active. And you want to use that activity. Don't use the low dopamine or the low dough feelings to eat more. Use them to move more, because you typically are healthier too than bigger sizes. So if you start counting, for example, or you enter into a deficit from an obese perspective, you might feel a little restless, but you can use that restlessness to work out further, and then it can help with your goal. So that can be hard, but that's what I would suggest to everybody who's in that phase and who's trying to downsize from that phase. It's very easy to get complacent there. It's a complacent place. I would consider that to be a complacent era. However, it is the worst, in my opinion, socially, to be small fat, because you get fingers pointed at you all across the spectrum, all of it, all the time. So it's like everybody has something to say about you. And I think that people who are small fat, they tend to be bullied more often and stuff in school, because it's like people they don't feel bad for you, but they don't feel it's like I said, you're not bad enough to where people feel bad for you, but you're still fat. So it's like there's still that stigma to you socially. And then you have physical issues too, which often have to be accommodated. And those accommodations can irritate people a lot. But it's like you're still invited to the party. So you're still within a proximity to mainstream society, but you're struggling. The way I described it when I was entering small fat and when I was leaving small fat is it's like you are invited to the party, or you're showing up to the party, but you're late. Or it's like going to work, but you're wearing the wrong uniform. That's kind of what it feels like. So there's often a lot of social compensations that have to be made in a small fat era. You have to be the funny fat friend. You have to be either super, super nice or super, super funny, or like, I don't give a fuck. I called it brat versus demure, basically. So you'll have that where you have to either be like really, really on your shit, very rizzy, extremely like outgoing, nice, funny, all that stuff, or you have to be like dramatic and funny and interesting and, more bratty, more I don't give a fuck, whatever. You'll see those stereotypes a lot within small fat people in media as well as in real life. You'll see it a lot. So they often feel the most social pressure to justify why they're invited or justify why they're in a space. And it's because it is actually the lowest social position you can be in. And some people stay there because they like that feeling. They like being the lowest on the totem pole. But that is the hardest it will be. So for people who are very big, you gradually get more social scrutiny, and it gets harder actually as you go down to that small fat, and then you get to mid and it lifts a little bit, and then average, oh my gosh, it's so easy. Nobody gives a fuck at all. And then once you start to get snatched and stuff, then you get a little bit of the jealousy crowd, or people start to be very judgy, or all of a sudden you have a huge ego and all that stuff. So that tends to happen later on. But yeah, your most difficult social position is a small fat person, in my opinion. And it's often too because when you're bigger, you tend to not be in as many situations, or you're not invited as much, because there's usually there's too many accommodations that have to be made. So yeah, and this is all physical too. So the physical does lead to social consequences, and people don't talk about that interaction enough.
Then we get to mid-fat, and these are sizes US 20 to 24, 26, usually 2X to 3X. And again, this is where we see a lot of brands start dropping off, all right?
Yeah, I would say mid-fat for them, I split it into, there's really like, this is where a lot of people will be more tortured-ish, okay? The reason why is because at this stage, you are the least attractive you will be. So it's different than small fat, because small fat, it's a look, it's a vibe. You can make it work. You can usually style it well. You can be very cute. You can think of like Tracy Turnblad in Hairspray. Like, she's cute, you know? When you're mid-fat, it doesn't work. You start to be shaped weirdly, and you get to that tortured era, basically. But it's kind of like, this is the category where you're invisible. Like, if you're introverted, you tend to be invisible. Totally invisible. Like, literally, like you're a ghost. Like, I shit you not. It's wild. But again, a lot of people want to be in that phase because they like being invisible. So it is something that people stick in. However, it's unhealthy as hell. You tend to be depressed very, very, very often. It's very bad hormonally. Your health really takes a shit when you become morbidly obese. That's usually why a lot of people pivot. I call it the pivot, where people get to morbid and they're like, oh my God, what the hell? And so what you'll tend to see within most people that are morbid is they'll approach it and they'll either pivot and turn, or they'll just dive in and then like fall into smo, basically, because it's an awful phase. It's pretty awful physically and psychologically. And it's also mutable, but it's like internally mutable. So it's strange, but this is typically where you can have some kind of an identity crisis, because you can't do the things that you used to be able to do physically. You can't play the sport you used to play. You can't hike on that hiking trail anymore. You start to have bigger health issues. And so you have to start saying no to a lot of things, and you can kind of lose yourself. And you have that same feeling when you're downsizing, because all of a sudden all that stuff starts to become available again. And then it's like, oh my God, this is possible? So you have to deal with it. Either way, it kind of creates identity issues, because again, people don't understand, like, when you go into morbid and then you get to super morbid, I describe it as you go to a different planet. When you're just like obese, you're back on Earth with all the rest of the humans. When you're morbid, it's like you're in space, you're on the moon, you know, you're not quite, and you tend to be very moon faced too, a lot when you're morbid. So it is pretty apt to be on the moon, but you're in between worlds. And that's very difficult. It's a very, very psychologically uncomfortable place to be. There's usually a lot of questions. It's typical. I call it tortured because it's usually a devastating time either way. It's either you're gaining and you're losing access to everything. You have to start creating a whole new framework of how to live your life, as you are probably on your way to being super morbidly obese. So you have to create that mental matrix to survive super morbid obesity. Or you are super morbidly obese and you're downsizing and you have to get rid of it. You have to get rid of that mental matrix. You have to tear it down. And for a lot of people that struggle with the toxic ritualistic, aka hinge, BINGE, those people really have to reckon with that issue in the tortured era. And it's usually severe because it has to be severe to get super morbid. So if you are downsizing, that phase is really hard. So socially, it's tough too, because this is typically when you're the least attractive you could be. This is the least attractive size. Once you get bigger than that, then you're going to start having people that like you for your size, puts you that way, and attention for that. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but that's basically the closest I could give as a comparison to what they're calling mid-fat.
And I had to say, like, a 2X, 3X is not the same.
But that invisibility, it does last for some of super morbid too. Like as you approach it, it starts to happen, So it's tricky. I used the term visibility a lot at that time, and I got shit for it again, like everything else I've said. But it's like, it's usually people who are thin who have never lost weight that have a huge issue. Who cares about terms like visibility? It's like, honey, somebody who's downsizing, they need to know. Like, are people going to be looking at me or not? People want to know that information. For example, and it fluctuates. In average era, your visibility is low. Then you start getting snatched. Then it goes up again. You see, it changes. And I just think people don't like how mutable weight is, but it's very, very mutable. I think it bothers people a lot, especially if they have TR issues, if they're in the toxic ritualistic.
I'm everywhere. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, boutique 2X, 3X is much smaller than, like, a torrid 2X, 3X.
Well, I'm even thinking
100%.
anthropology. Anthropology goes up to a 3X, and anthropology 3X is not the same as a torrid 3X.
Right. And so these are people who are mid-fats typically do have to shop at plus-size retailers. They can't go and find straight size clothing that's going to fit them. Can't go to Target's a New Day collection and fit into the XXLs. They're not going to be able to work with that.
You're like me in high school. You couldn't get the Paramore shirt. It didn't fit. It was only an XL. It wasn't a 2.
They don't have many brick and mortar stores to shop at. So again, you'll notice a lot of these terms pop up in fashion spaces, and it is a lot about access to clothing, even though we know this starts shaping other things. They do face much more institutionalized sizeism, and they're most likely going to experience weight stigma at work, in their relationships, healthcare. They're probably going to have some trouble accessing public spaces like chairs, certain seatings, and they are still accommodated to a certain degree more than people on the larger end of the plus size spectrum.
Yeah.
So again, like, if we think about Target as a pretty accessible store to most of America,
it's pretty desolate. If you're introverted, it's desolate. If you're extroverted, you still take a hit. It's like a hit. So it's not as devastating, I don't think, but you're not as noticeable. And it's because people typically, they view fat people as either hugely fat or small fat. So again, they have a hard time categorizing you as a fat person. So they're like, and then it's like their brain just doesn't see you. So you have to compensate for that if you care. Like as an extrovert, you probably would care, so you'd have to really compensate. But if you're introverted, you'll just be flat out invisible, basically. And so like I was in that mid-fat phase for like a year. And it's like I would go out in public and nobody would ever talk to me. It was crazy. And it was a nightmare for social media. Absolute nightmare for branding. It was horrible because people don't click. They're like, who the hell? What? And then they don't click because it's like, I don't know. It's like kind of repulsive in a way. I know that's harsh, but I'm just being real. That's how people are. I think it's repulsive because it's kind of like, I don't know what to make of you. And people would rather feel, this is so harsh, but I have to be real about it. People would rather feel disgusted or dazzled than confused. And so when you're in that phase, people feel confused. So they're like, so then they just don't think about you. And yeah, it's tough. It's a tough one. I was duffed at this phase. It was devastating. But it happened. It happens. It happens quite a bit. It's tough. It's a tough one, but it's still not as tough as small fat because you're invisible. So you don't really have a lot of interaction.
To a 4X, and I believe for them that is like a 26, 28. Now, when I was a 28, their jeans did not fit me. So, like, again, I question some of it. It's not necessarily the same as a plus size retailer's plus size.
Right.
But they might be able to walk into their neighborhood big box store and find something that fits. Even though they likely would experience issues flying on a plane, having a seatbelt that fits, all of that stuff, right? So they are facing barriers. Large fats are women's size 26 to 32 or 4X, 5X. And there are some, like, these are where some of the terms start changing.
Yeah.
But essentially, this is where you really...
It's very smo. You're very big. When you are smo, you could get into that low cow territory if you're not careful. But people tend to... You're in a constant flight or fight mode. A lot of people have deep unresolved issues psychologically as well as physically in that stage. And it's just hard. You can fight a lot. There's a lot of fighting too. A lot of people don't talk about that. But if you look at, like, you know, a lot of the low cow stuff, they fight a lot. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of rage. There's a lot of, like, a lack of emotional control. There's a lot of shyness. There's just all over the place. There's a lot of craziness. Like, it's kind of like you're always drunk when you're that big. It's tough. I mean, you could still drive and stuff, but it's like you don't have as good of inhibitions. So you act very, very inappropriately. But because you're so big, people feel bad for you. So they don't really care that you're acting inappropriately. The other thing is you do draw the attention of people who are super attracted to being that big. And there is a spotlight on you. So this is where it's easier to get attention because you'll get attention just for your size at that size. So again, I would consider probably, you know, these women, they try to act like they're in that category. Like if you look at this angle, she looks huge in this angle. She's probably not as big as she looks in this angle, but it's the angle. But they're still going for the angle. Even if it's subconscious, I believe it's so that they can get more attention. And they do get more attention because people perceive them as much bigger than they are. So then they kind of enter into that, like, whoa, you're huge category. You get me? And then you get eyes on you. That's where you get to, like, the TLC stuff. Is when people are here. There's a lot of attention, and that can be really hard when that starts to go away. As you get to that mid-fat and tortured aspect, it starts to go away. So that's really tricky. But yeah, this is where a lot of people launch careers at this stage. It's where a lot of people, you're noticed just for your size, and it's very, very difficult for that to go away. So yeah, it's hard for people to give it up. Which is why you will see a lot of people don't want to. They don't want the show to end, you know. But it takes a lot to keep it up. You have to eat a lot to be that big. And it's difficult physically. It's extremely physical. It's miserable physically. Absolutely miserable.
They are only able to work with specifically plus size retailers in terms of getting clothing. You're having to access that stuff. You're not going to find things in any kind of neighborhood store. You're going to have to find specialty stores whose customer is a plus size customer. This one also, sometimes people call Lane Bryant fats, which apparently was coined by writer Roxane Gay. And I know people
Yeah.
have complicated feelings about Roxane Gay as like a voice for the fat population. I haven't spent enough time reading her work to say anything about that. But they're on the larger end of the fatness spectrum, and their access gets smaller. We're going to keep seeing access get smaller and smaller to material goods.
A lot of stuff
clothing.
has to do because of physical barriers and health issues, but they won't mention that at all, which is fascinating to me.
But also, again, they're going to face significant issues when it comes to facing stigma or discrimination,
Yeah.
and then also accessing physical spaces. And then there's the term super fat. This is often used for women size 26 and up, which obviously does overlap with the large fat. I know that when I was I was a size 28-30, I identified as a super fat.
I did too.
And that was the
I used the
terminology
term
I was
super
using.
fat at the time. But it's because super fat, it is specific. Like there's a spotlight on you. There is a difference. Whereas like the tail end of SMO, like as you're losing, when you get towards lower levels of supermorbid obesity, you enter into that invisibility aspect more so. And then you start to approach that torturedness. I had an identity crisis. I always talk about it, but I had an identity crisis as I was getting towards the end of SMO. And I was mid-fat at that stage for sure, where it's like I was invisible, basically. Whereas when I was towards, I was like 370, or 380. That was when I was super fat. And that lasted until around like 340 for me. So after that 40 pounds, then it's like it starts to go away. And so like really that last 50 pounds, like so from like 340 to 290 basically, I was still super morbid, but I was more so in that invisible fat stage. And that's when I had that identity crisis and all that stuff. It's very difficult. It's a tough, super morbid is very hard. I just have to keep saying it. It's the hardest of all of them. It's very, very hard. But yeah, there is definitely a difference. Like I felt a huge difference from being 370 to 330. It's crazy. And I used to call it the eye of the duff, which is when you're like completely invisible. For me, that was around 315 at 6'1". So it's crazy, but it does exist.
Too. And this is definitely a community term. It was coined by the community.
Yeah.
So this is a community term, and they often used it because those voices were so diminished. So even if you're in a plus size space, this is when you start seeing some in community stigma. All right.
Yeah.
I'm a fat, but I'm not a super fat.
Yeah.
That's not true. Super fats within fat acceptance are put on a pedestal, and they're seen as the voice that we all have to listen to and all that stuff. Not that I was in fat acceptance, but I'm just saying that. Like, they're very, very listened to. If you're very, very huge, people will listen to what you have to say about fatness. It was easier. I had, like, automatic credibility at that size when I would talk as an activist about fatness. So there is privilege, actually, in that size. That's why people stay there. There's some level of privilege being that big. And I don't even just mean financially to be able to sustain it. I mean like socially. Because again, people don't realize like those next two categories, like when you get to that mid-fat, you're invisible. It's difficult. You're the least attractive you'll ever be. Then you get to small fat, you have so much social scrutiny on you. Those two are like 1-2 punches. So even socially, people will try to downsize. They'll face these social barriers at those levels, and they'll gain back up because they like where they were. Because you have to remember too, like when somebody's super huge and they're trying to downsize, it's kind of like you're walking into a dark tunnel and you don't know what comes out on the other side. it takes a leap of faith. And that's why I talked a lot about faith recently in some of my posts and stuff. And it pissed everybody off again. I get so much pushback. It's a common trend. It didn't piss everybody off, but it pissed off some people because it's like, it takes a leap of faith. You don't know, especially if you've been that big your whole life. You don't know what comes next. And you're telling people you need to go down that path and you need to just keep going. And they're like, what? But nobody likes you anymore. It's hard. It's so hard. It totally, like, it really blunted my activism. It's like, it made it hard to be noticed. It was hard. From a social media perspective, it was a nightmare. There's a reason why a lot of people will not lose that are known for being big. Like, I think Anna O'Brien, she'd have such a difficult time being at that kind of mid-fat zone, the tail end of super morbid, getting towards morbid. She'd have such a hard time with it because nobody would care. Nobody would talk about her anymore. It's hard. It's tough. And I think people don't realize, like, that aspect is there. I'm glad I experienced it because I understand it so much. Like, there is a lot of social pressure to stay that big, and people don't understand that. But I'm here to report it to you.
So these people are facing not only stigma from all that was already there, but also they might face it in the community itself. And
so she's completely wrong. They're completely wrong.
Access. They experience discrimination.
Yeah, lack of access, yes. It's usually due to physical barriers that have to do with being that big. It is not a sustainable size. It's kind of ridiculous size.
Lack of access issues on a daily basis. They're excluded often from many public areas of life. They're not going to be able to go to the theater and see a show and fit it there.
Typically, yeah. Unless if they're super short or whatever. But, yeah. I mean, if they're a 4X, yeah.
That probably starts, I think, I would say, in my experience, that access really gets limited size 24 and up, in my experience of public spaces.
Yeah.
And then there's an InfiniFat. That was coined by Ash of the Fat Lip. She has a podcast.
So that's the phase I never got to. So that's kind of like my 600-pound life, like that level, like bed-bound levels. It's a different level, in my opinion.
I'm not sure if she's still posting or not, but she is active on social media. That's women's sizes 32, 34 and up. And again, they have significant barriers.
I would consider Amberlyn Reed to be in that category. I never made it there, but it's like you're basically bedbound. Like, you're getting to that point because you're that big. Whereas, like, when Amberlyn Reed started her channel, she was just super fat,
Based on sizeism. And they're underserved by the businesses that serve plus size customers. So
they're just very, very rare. They're very, very rare. It's really not common to be that big.
There are businesses or products that serve them. And then again, even in the community, they're not finding very much support from those who identify as fat or in the fat community. They may have to have their clothing custom made because there's no place to buy it. And they're excluded from participating in many areas of public life. And
they're also extremely unhealthy. So, yeah, it's tough. But you just have to watch, like, My 600-Pound Life. That's basically what they're talking about.
It's intense discrimination and mistreatment in healthcare. And this is where we'll start seeing a lot of people getting ultimatums in medical care or forced to do certain medical acts that they might not want to. And I also feel like this tends to get the people who are often used in media for I don't know what the word I want to say.
Sensationalized.
Sensationalized, pretty dehumanized. And so they face the worst of the weight stigma.
Yes, absolutely.
So those are some of the different terms that are used popularly. I'm sure there's other.
Okay, so we will pick this up again next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I enjoyed that little rundown. I hope you guys enjoy this series. I will talk to you guys again soon. Have a good rest of your day, night, etc. Peace.